Morning, everyone, to the Equitable Communities Revitalization Grant Round 2 Overview webinar. My name is Natalie Nava. I am the Program Manager with the Center for Creative Land Recycling. Before we get started, we are going to start a poll. And we just want to get a sense from the audience, what are the top 3 areas where you will need assistance with your application? We have designing an application concept, determining eligibility, developing application scope and budget, pre-submittal review of application, finding, hiring a consultant, and assistance with environmental regulatory oversight, assistance with community engagement questions, thinking about leveraging other funds or any other questions. We've been doing technical assistance for a couple months and just wanted to also get a sense of what other needs were coming through. So while that pulls up, next slide, please. I'd like to just go over the meeting guidelines. So by participating in this meeting, you understand the meeting is being recorded. You may be muted for background noise. The chat feature will be used to distribute information and accept questions that we'll be reading during the Q&A period at the end. And then this meeting is about the Equitable Community Revitalization Grant, and we won't be able to address other topics. And now I'd like to introduce Mariam Tasnif-Abbasi from the Department of Toxic Substances Control. Mariam.
Good morning, Natalie, and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited to be kicking off round 2. And before I get into the topics that we're going to be discussing today, Natalie, did you want to discuss the poll responses?
Yeah, we have, it looks like 38%, 63%, which is the highest, want help determining eligibility. So we do have the eligibility self-check tool that we use during one-on-one technical assistance that we ask people to look at beforehand, but we can always answer questions. And then we have designing an application concept, pre-submittal review of application, and developing application scope and budget as well. Really everything is almost pretty equal for community engagement, but we will have a webinar just on that, and you might have questions once you see the application. So I'll share the results again, and then Mariam, you can complete the intro.
Sounds good. I'm going to go ahead and jump in. We've got a very sort of dense amount of information that we have to present today, and I'm going to try and get through this as quickly as we can. I'm going to just give everyone an overview of what the Equitable Community Revitalization Grant is. We'll talk a little bit about our current ECR grantees. I'll touch on some major topics on how much money is available, broadly eligibility requirements, our schedule, how you can get free resources to help you prepare for your application. And we'll definitely be talking about where you can get more in-depth information in our upcoming ECRGenius webinars that are happening every Tuesday for the next few weeks. So, broader background, where did the ECRG come from? In 2021, the governor signed the Cleanup in Vulnerable Communities initiative, where DTSC was given $500 million primarily to expedite cleanup and beneficial uses of idled properties throughout the state, with a very, very strong emphasis on disadvantaged communities. We have several programs, as you can see in our little wheel over here. Some money went to our existing orphan sites program. We have a workforce development program, technical assistance grants that are currently being worked on, a community benefits agreement component. The 2 big pieces are the discovery and enforcement program, which focuses on evaluating and addressing investigation and cleanup at former dry cleaning sites, and our program that we're going to focus on today in the next few weeks, which is the Equitable Community Revitalization Grant. Out of that $500 million that I just mentioned, our program was given $270.5 million. We are currently in the second of 3 rounds, and very, very broadly, public entities, tribes, and nonprofits can apply for community-wide assessments, site-specific investigations, and site-specific cleanups. We are really excited to have be at almost the 1-year point with our first cohort of ECR grantees. This slide makes us really happy. Anthony from our team pulled together all the logos of the different organizations that we've been working with for the past year. And what we want is for your organization to be represented in our family of ECR grantees next year and the year after. This is just a snapshot of our current grantees. We have 53 different grantees that we're working with. We had given out $75.4 million in funds in our last round. As you can see, these 84 sites that we're working on, because some of these grants have the ability to bring in multiple sites, have a focus in the more Northern California and Southern California urban areas. We are trying to change that, and I'll talk a little bit about that in some of my later slides. Most of our sites were in the highest Callan-Byers Green percentile score areas. Next slide, please. So what are the biggest differences between round 1 and round 2? Essentially, I think I'd like to emphasize that it's almost a completely different application. We updated a lot of our questions and a lot of our concepts based on lessons learned and the great number of feedback that we received from the users of our program and those who had applied. We have a much stronger emphasis on advancing environmental justice goals. We are trying to really increase our network for applicant support. We've definitely increased the funding for each grant type. And really, I think some of our structure in round 2 is going towards creating a greater accountability from the grantee side of things. For those of you who took the time to take a look at our April draft guidelines, those have been updated a little based on feedback. I think one of the biggest changes that you'll see from the draft that we issued in April is that based on comments and feedback, those of you who participated in our ECR gathering, took the time to send us comments, those of you who attended our meetings that we had in person and online and shared your advice and your comments and your feedback. I think the big change that we made is that there's a little bit more opening for different types of reuses. I think the last time in April, our draft guidelines basically said that unless you had a Callan-Byers Green score of 75 or above, or a poverty percentile of 50 or above, there wasn't a space for entering into the grant. But we made some modifications to allow for affordable housing to be an eligible application. All the other eligibility criteria notwithstanding, that was opened up a little bit. And we'll be sending out some more information in an open letter on how everyone's feedback helped us make some enhancements to the guidelines. I've already sort of mentioned the money part. We've got $350,000, a fixed amount available for community-wide assessments. Site-specific investigations have a bottom of $150,000. The ceiling is at $7 million. And site-specific investigations are from $300,000 all the way to $10 million. If the money gets allocated, we're anticipating one last round of $100 million, which is going to be available next fall. So community-wide assessments are our starter grants. These are the ones that we use for very early stage type of work where reuse is being planned and you want to get a better sense of what the environmental conditions are. We usually like to talk about this in terms of, what would you like to learn about the site before you make plans? So phase ones and phase ones with sampling to determine whether you want to make a specific plan for the site, whether you want to purchase a site, whether you want to sell a site. These are the starting entry points where some of the more refined and detailed requirements that you'd see with site-specific investigation and site-specific cleanups do not apply for these community-wide assessments. And so we really encourage these for the organizations, whether you're city or nonprofit or tribe, where you're trying to understand what your brownfield capacity is and where you want to make a deeper investment down the line in terms of investigation and cleanup. The next ones are site-specific investigations. One of the changes that we did make between round one and round two is that we have a stronger definition on the site investigation. Any early stage investigation, all the way up to the preparation of a cleanup plan, everything but implementation of the cleanup plan can happen in this site-specific investigation grant. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. The site-specific cleanup plan, also another change from round one, is that the entry point now is a cleanup plan that is either approved or under review by a regulatory agency. And so that's a very clear demarcation of how we're defining the entry points and the purposes of these different types of grant types. Next slide, please. What is our payment process? I know this is probably one of the most important questions that we like to answer. First of all, we are called a reimbursement grant. What we found in using that reimbursement terminology sometimes, that there is a misunderstanding that perhaps the invoices have to be paid in order to get reimbursed through our process. That's not true. As long as the work is done, you can present the invoices to us in batches of a minimum of $15,000, I mean, and you get a check from the state controller's office within 90 days. From speaking with our current grantees, this is happening a lot sooner, but we'd like to make sure for planning purposes that you give us that cushion. The reimbursements are for eligible costs incurred directly by the grantee. I do like to emphasize this because sometimes there are multiple organizations involved in a specific project, but our money and our reimbursement process is specifically for our grantee and costs incurred by them. We get this question asked a lot. Costs that are incurred prior to the agreement being executed are not eligible for reimbursement. And the first day that our grantees are authorized to spend would be the date that the agreement is signed by DTSC. Who can apply? Public entities, any unit of a local government, school districts, special district or agency, council of government, counties. So any type of public entity, nonprofit organizations who have their 501c3 paperwork, and any tribe regardless of federal recognition. Generally, the sites that are eligible are sites that have to meet the definition of a brownfield, which is any property where expansion is made complicated by perceived or real contamination. The applicants have to either own the site or have access to the site at the time they submit the application and for the 2-year funding period. And the access, the site must be located in a disadvantaged area, and the reuse must be for a primary benefit of a vulnerable population. I'll talk a little bit more about this when we bring up our slide on the Kallenbara screen scores. This is a little bit of a longer list for ineligible sites. I'll have you go through this, but basically anything that's either slated for Superfund, listed for Superfund, or is a Superfund site, any site where there's a RCRA permit. It's part of any kind of like hazardous waste facility permit if it's state or federally owned and controlled, where there's some sort of US EPA direction. So, anytime there's like enforcement, and these are essentially really more complicated sites that are well beyond what we can manage through our grant and our grant funding allocations. So how do we define an ECRG disadvantage areas? Well, we use CalEnviroScreen, and we're using version 4.0. We prioritize census tracts where the score is 75% or greater, but we do have some exceptions. As long as the reuse is for the primary benefit of a disadvantaged community, we will accept sites that are in the geographies where the CES poverty percentile is greater than 50. Over 75 on this map is represented in red, and the 50 plus poverty percentile is represented in yellow. So you can see we can pick up a very large amount of Californian geography by using these markers through CES. If the project is 100% affordable housing, and just as an FYI, we use the low income tax credit definition is what we've incorporated into our guidelines. That's where 40% of the units are at or below 60% AMI. Up to 80% AMI is allowable as long as the average of all the units combined is still at or below 60% AMI. And so that's the definition that is currently incorporated into our guidelines. For tribal uses are eligible regardless of the CES score. And we've got some flexibilities that we offer specific for tribes that I'll speak to a little bit more in some of my later slides. We have this little tool that we use to find the site CES score. I'm going to hand this slide over to Greg Schaefer, our statewide brownfields coordinator, who's going to speak to how we can access that. Greg?
Hey, good morning, everyone. So on our ECRG webpage for new applicant resources, there is a button that you can see highlighted in a little red cloud on here. It is our web tool for acquiring a handful of information that's going to be required to be input into your grant application. So on the right-hand side, you'll see with a preview of what the web app looks like. The color coding on here matches the previous slide that Miriam mentioned, just in some different overlays. Yellow is again the poverty percentile, but on this page, green is it's a transparent green. Is the overall CES score above 75%. So in order to use the web tool, all you'll have to do is either search the address of the site that you're interested in, or just zoom to it on the map and click. It's going to do a little pop-up window for additional information with, I think, four different data points. One of them is going to be, the state assembly district, the state senate district, which are all questions that we ask for in the application. And then it's also going to tell you the CalEnviroScreen score and the poverty percentile, which are also going to be questions and data entry into your application that you're going to need. If you have any questions when you're doing this, we really recommend you work with CClear. Miriam will mention that a little bit later and get some technical assistance. But we've tried to make the web app pretty user-friendly and easy to use. So yeah, back to you, Miriam.
Thanks, Greg. I'm going to be going through some slides right now, but I'm not going to be going through this information because a lot of this information is going to be covered in depth in some of our next ECRGenius webinars. So for this particular one, regulatory oversight is required for site-specific investigation and site-specific cleanup grants. DTSC, local agencies, and the water boards are all allowable agencies because they have the authority to do this work in our state. And they are going to require if you're not with DTSC, we're going to require a project suitability letter. But like I said, we have information on our website, and Greg will be talking about this in depth in our next webinar, which is going to take place next week. The reuse must be for the benefit of a disadvantaged or vulnerable community. And one of the very, very specific components that are new to this round is that if the reuse is for residential purposes, for school, any sort of hospital or daycare, we are asking that the cleanup approach evaluated be one that does not require the use of long-term stewardship or land use controls. And this is something that we are generally going to be talking about in ECRGenius number 3, which is going to take place on Tuesday, the 8th of August. We also have a list of in our draft guidelines and in our guidelines that will be coming out, the final version in August. We do have a list of reuses that we have noted that have a potential to cause significant pollution. So you've got some guide to work with. But generally, because this money is about cleaning up land, revitalizing land, and bringing it to a higher and better purpose for use by the communities, we really are staying away from reuses that have the potential to cause further aggravation to already disadvantaged and vulnerable communities. In round 2, we've really strongly emphasized meaningful community engagement. And one of the ways we are going about doing this is by using the spectrum of public participation, which has 5 levels of communication. Once again, this is a very, very deep topic that I'm not going to be touching upon today. We do have more information available on our website. We have information in our draft guidelines, which are currently available, and we are going to have a very specific webinar on ECRGenius 3 focused on engagement, equity, reuse, and that'll take place on the 8th of August. In our guidelines for round 1, we had equitable development commitments. In deepening our understanding of equity in reuse, speaking with subject matter experts and advocacy groups, we've learned a lot more about how reuse and revitalization of a property can be integrated with community needs and community aspirations. And so what were the equitable development commitments have been sort of recategorized as community benefit commitments. They come in, I think we've got 5 different categories: expanded economic opportunity, stabilized communities, increasing mobility and connectivity, healthier and safer community creation, and broadly meeting environmental and advancing environmental justice goals. The specific different applications require a certain number, a minimum number of these commitments. And once again, because this particular topic has such depth to it, I highly encourage you to visit our website, take a look at the information we already have, and sign up for our August 8th website to learn more about what these commitments are, where they came from. And UC Berkeley's Othering and Belonging Institute will be there leading this dialogue to help us all learn a little bit more and create depth to our applications. I think one of the most sort of difficult concepts for even us to wrap around as an organization was setting up this circular liability defense. Basically what this is that we want our funding to go to applicants who haven't caused or contributed to the contamination that's being addressed through ECRG funding. There is, very specific requirements to establish what we call a circle liability defense. It has a lot more depth to it than, did you actually, physically cause a contamination? It goes into how the property was acquired, how the property was managed, and sort of a lot of different components and different entities, whether you're a tribe or a nonprofit or a public entity, have sort of different decision trees and logic trees to figure out when or when not circle liability defense is required. And there's sort of various combinations because we've got different requirements based on what type of application you're going to be submitted. So we'll be going into this in depth on our next webinar, the 1st of August. This will be ECRGenius number 2. We have our self-check tool online that actually walks question by question, like walks you through the entire process. So definitely those are things that you should consider going through if you're already decided that you want to apply for our funds. This is a table I think we're going to be repeating in our next ECRGenius webinar as well. This basically is showing that we're tying the need for a circle liability defense based on whether or not you own the site and what type of application you're going to be submitting. Our CWAs, or community-wide assessment applicants, do not need to worry about this. There's still some attestations that they have to sign, but you don't have to go through the process of establishing this defense, the series of questions that we have in our self-check tool. Tribes are exempt from having to establish a circle liability defense for sites that they own. But more to come on this in our next webinar. So I think I wanted to spend a little bit of time discussing this because we are the Equitable Community Revitalization Grant. Equity is the cornerstone of why this allocation was made to DTSC, and it's something we take very, very seriously. And so we've had a lot of conversations with our applicants, with parties who are interested in applying, nonprofits, all different types of public entities, tribes, and we've had a lot of conversations with environmental advocacy groups and community groups who are interested in helping us deepen our equity lens. And so one of the big things I think for us is something I mentioned earlier, is that we are trying to create better cleanups, and that's why sites planned for housing, schools, clinics, or daycare, we really want these sites to consider cleanup approaches that do not require land use covenants, deed restrictions, and long-term stewardship as part of the final remedy. Focusing on community considerate cleanups. And that's basically, I think, very much part of our fabric and ethos right now, is to really think of community forward cleanups. We have a very strong focus on the essential need for the proposed reuse and how that reuse is going to provide real and tangible value to the existing community. One of the reasons why we came up with a list of reuses that had the potential to cause pollution is because we want to take a stand and really try and encourage, better environmental practices through the use of this money. Having our spectrum of public participation to assess the level of engagement really helps us understand what our applicants are doing, and it gives us a very specific structure to follow in how to deepen community engagement, which is also, I think, another cornerstone of our grant and of our CVCI program in general. Having our community benefit commitments being better defined and creating like a requirement as well, I think is also going to be really helpful, because we do want to follow these projects even beyond the time that the cleanups are completed, because cleanups and investigations are great for providing some resolution and you know, what the environmental conditions are, and we understand the value that creates. But we feel that this money has been entrusted to us as an organization to do something beyond that. And I believe that all of these different components that we've incorporated in this year's application will help us get there and land in an overall better place for all of our communities. For any of our attendees today who are either representing tribes or working directly with tribes, I wanted to take a moment to talk about some of the special considerations that we've incorporated. The first thing is that for tribes, reuses are eligible regardless of the CES score. Excuse me. So all of our applicants get assigned a base number of points based on their Callan-Barr screen score. With tribes, they get assigned the maximum, the 100 points automatically. Tribal monitoring, incorporation of indigenous knowledge and tribal ecological knowledge, and all sorts of tribal engagement are eligible tasks for all of our grants. We, based on conversations that we had with, through our ECR growing process, and those of you who spoke with us about, sort of aspiring applications, we did have discussions that an applicant can apply on behalf of a tribe if the reuse is for the sole benefit of the tribe, and we've got a written letter or agreement of support, because we understand partnerships are very important for all applications, in particular for tribal applications. Circular liability defense, as I mentioned, not required for sites owned by tribes. And tribes may serve as their environmental regulatory oversight agency as long as Greg is consulted with to ensure that compliance with requirements, the requirements are complied with. Look, we understand that tribes are unique and they have special circumstances. Our goal is to listen, learn, and do whatever we can to offer broad flexibility to accommodate tribes wherever possible. We've had conversations with several tribes. We want to increase the dialogue and see what additional flexibilities we can offer so that we have a strong tribal representation in our next cohort of ECR grantees. This is our schedule. Basically, our guidelines are and application are going to be released on the 14th of August, which is a Monday. We'll continue to have our technical assistance and provide assistance. I'll talk about that a little bit more. There are oversight request deadlines on September 11th. We are going to have a very thorough question by question application walkthrough on the 15th of August, and application deadline is on the 9th of October. We should have our decisions made, I think, through late January, early February is what we're thinking right now. Round 3, we don't have our exact dates, but those of you who are interested in round 3 and kind of planning for that, taking more time, we anticipate that round 3 is going to open sometime next year in August. So August, September 2024 is when we're thinking round 3 will open. This one pager is something that I find really, really useful. It's hyperlinked in the slides. It's available on our website, and it gives a lot of snapshot information, which is good for if you need to explain something to a client or to a manager in a very short form. We are looking for all of you to send in your applications. Our preference, of course, is for the highest Callan-Barr screen scores and poverty percentiles. We want high impact projects that really provide tangible and real benefits to the community. And we prefer the cleanups where community considered approaches are being incorporated. As I mentioned, we'd love to see more tribes, and we definitely want to get better geographic representation. As you saw on one of my earlier slides, the current grantee cohorts are concentrated in these Southern California, Northern California urban areas. We really want to see better geographic representation in our next cohort. Please use the resources on our website. We've got a lot of information there, summary information on all of our current grantees. We've got our eligibility self-check tool, which has a list of the information needed for the application. You can start gathering the documents needed for the application, participate in all our webinars that we've pushed quite heavily in this, and we will continue to do so. Definitely work with our brownfield technical assistance provider, who actually has been working with some environmental consultants, and they can help you get access to some pro bono environmental consultation if that's something that you need. The Center for Creative Land Recycling, Natalie did our introduction, and she's going to be leading our Q&A. She and her team are fantastic. We brought them on board specifically to provide free assistance to you. They can help you with early stage planning, with envisioning. They can help you work through the self-check tool to understand whether your organization and your site is in fact eligible. They can help you create that strong narrative that's needed in the application, so we can understand who you are and what your needs are, and that reflects in the application. And the one thing that I really think is a great assistance is their application pre-submittal review. If you plan ahead enough in time, you can work with them and they can review your application. They have access to the Flux portal, and they can give you pointers on how to take your application and make it better. We know from CClear's history working with us and working with EPA, working with them will dramatically increase your chance of success. This is a summary of our upcoming webinars. Like I had mentioned before, the next one, which is next week, focuses on eligibility, ownership, and access. We really are trying to demystify the self-check tool and circle liability. Greg is going to be taking the lead on that one, and he's going to be presenting some real-life scenarios to demonstrate the application requirements. The one after that is going to be focused on engagement, equity, and reuse. That's going to be the one that's led by UC Berkeley's OBI as our special guest. And the last one, I think, is really important. If you're an applicant and you know you're going to be submitting your application, then I would say that's probably the most important webinar for you to participate, because we will be walking through section by section. I think I said question by question. It's going to be more section by section. We're going to highlight on how to answer questions. You can see how the application looks in Flux and really get an understanding of what we mean by some of the questions that we're asking. And I think it would be really well served if you can take the time to participate in that one with us. So I think that brings us to the end of my presentation. I'm going to turn the floor over to Natalie, and we can get started on the Q&A.
Great, thank you, Miriam. So I just wanted to say that we will be emailing out the slides and the recording by within a week's time of all the webinars. So please sign up for the email list on DTSC's ECRG website, but you can also just check back on the DTSC ECRG, the new applicant page, as well. We'll have links to everything. So for the question and answer portion, we have a lot of questions in the chat that I'll be going through, but let me just read any other instructions. You are also welcome to raise your hand, use the raise your hand feature, and then I will invite you to unmute your audio. And first we'll go through the chat questions in case, and so we can get through those, and then we'll do anyone who's raised their hands. If people are on the Zoom phone line, you would press *9 to join the phone queue, and I will say the last 4 digits of the phone number when it's your turn, and then you press *6 to unmute your line. And then for the chat feature, I will go through all the questions right now. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. See. Okay, so we have some questions on site eligibility. So it says, if a nonprofit, this is from Serena Collins, if a nonprofit is applying, but is not the owner of the site, are there specific eligibility requirements for the owner?
Yes. We'll talk about this in our next webinar. If a nonprofit is applying for a site that they do not own, then there is an owner attestation letter that they have to provide. We are working on a draft of that, and we will have it on our website. It's basically a letter that the applicant can share with the owner and have the owner use that as a model to sign. The owner has to indicate that they've provided access to the applicants. There has to be some kind of access agreement in place. And I know that can take different forms, but whatever form it takes, we have to, they have to prove that they will have access to the site for the next 2 years. And I think the last way to do it is that if they're under a purchase agreement and the purchase is going to take place within the 2-year grant term, then I think that then there's not additional requirements for the owner. Because if there's a short-term purchase that's going to take place, then it's just about the relationship between us and the applicant. So I hope that answers Serena's question.
Yeah. Now, Mary, did you want to answer that question too from the perspective of a cleanup grant? I think all of what you've just mentioned is for an investigation.
Sure. Greg, why don't you go ahead and answer it from the perspective of a cleanup grant?
Yeah. So what Miriam mentioned, the flexibility in our investigation grants. But if an applicant does not own the site for which they are applying for a cleanup grant specifically, we are expecting that the property owner has a CERCLA liability defense themselves. So it is a little bit higher of a bar for the cleanup grants themselves, but the kind of attestation would be an acceptable eligibility threshold for the investigation grants.
Thanks, Greg. And I'll have Serena, when we release the slide deck, take a look at slide 20. That's where we have that table that's going to be updated in the self-check tool. It's simpler than the version that we have right now. That basically kind of walks you through the different options and what's required from the owner.
Yeah.
Okay, I will go to the next question then. Thank you. If this question's from Marina Magana, if a site was previously under regulatory order but is no longer, is the site eligible?
Yes, if you have a letter from the agency confirming whatever that agency's process is of resolving the order, then that site is no longer under an order and it is in fact eligible as long as the other eligibility criteria are met.
Great. We have a question from Yamini. Do applicants have to show proof of matching funds during application? And then the second part of it is, since this is a reimbursement grant, is it possible to request the grant money in advance once awarded?
Okay, great. Great questions. Applicants do not have to show proof of matching funds. We do not have a match requirement. For the second part of the question, no, there is no advance payment. Once the agreement is signed, proceed with eligible and approved tasks, send us the invoices when the work is completed, and we will pay, we will provide a check to cover the cost of those invoices. Those invoices do not have to be paid in order for us to provide the reimbursement check.
Okay, next question is from Megan Ogburn. If the site is a RCRA LQG, I'm not sure what those acronyms are, Miriam, but maybe let everyone know in case someone has a similar question. So does that make the site ineligible?
Yes, we don't do We do not do RCRA sites. So RCRA sites are more complicated. They have more nuances. They're a statutory authority that creates some complications in the way we do work. So we do not, those are not considered to be eligible.
Okay, next question is from David Foster. Our site in Santa Cruz County does not qualify except as an affordable project. So for this one, Miriam, the CES score is just below the threshold and the poverty score, but it is 100% affordable housing, but it's mixed use with a nonprofit social service programs that serve the low income population. Would we still qualify? So I think they're asking if, because there's an exemption for affordable housing as far as CES score and the poverty percentile, but this this project is mixed use, so it has other services. So is it still, I believe it's still eligible according to our self-check tool, but I just wanted to double check with you because we've done.
Yeah, I think this is where we might have to have a specific conversation with David, because our grant guidelines are going to be very specific, that below 50, the 50th percentile of poverty, the only allowable reuse is affordable housing that meets the definition that's incorporated in our guidelines. And so that portion of the project will be eligible. How the services are set up and whether they're part of the affordable housing development, I think that's a question that we should probably discuss, because our guidelines, the way they're written, do not make any provisions other than saying 100% affordable housing that meets our definition.
Okay, we can, David, I'd encourage you to just schedule an application assistance call and we can bring in someone from DTSC to answer that question. To discuss further. Yeah. Okay, the next question is from Paloma Avila. Could you please put the link to the spectrum of public participation in the chat? So there, the link is there, and it's also in the draft guidelines that are on the ECRG website. There's a question from Yamini, another one. Are there any requirements around CEQA to qualify for the phase 2 or the cleanup grant?
So ECRG is not necessarily making project decisions. CEQA for the cleanup is an eligible task that can be funded. The CEQA requirements lie with whatever the regulatory agency requires. And so that's a question for the regulatory agency. When you're working with DTSC, we require CEQA analysis for all of our cleanups. So yes, and so I would say if you have any, this question, I feel like there's more to it. And so if you could arrange a call and call Doris, Doris can kind of have a deeper discussion with you on how that interplay works.
Yeah, Doris, maybe if you want to put your contact information in the chat or reach out.
Doris will go ahead and do that, yeah.
Okay. Just a reminder, the application opens and closes August 14th of this year. August 14th and closes October 9th. So related to that, Hannah asked a question, when is round 3 expected to start? If you want to just repeat that, Miriam.
Yes, so we are thinking, we don't have dates in mind, but we're thinking generally fall of 2024 is when round 3 is expected to start.
What qualifies as a brownfield? From Elaine, what definition of a brownfield is being used?
So our definition of brownfield is very similar to EPA's definition of brownfield. It's any real property, the expansion, redevelopment, and reuse of which may be complicated by the presence of or potential presence of hazardous substances, pollutants, or contaminants. So it's just basically, a real property where you think or know that there is potential contamination, and that's hampering reuse plans.
Okay, next question is from Michael. Is there a list of environmental consultants that have worked on ECRG?
No, we don't have such a list. It's an interesting question. I've never had it asked in that way before. We have a list of grantees and they are all using environmental consultants, but we don't have a list of consultants who've done work on ECRG.
Yeah, I can mention from specifically from the Center for Creative Land Recycling, we have talked to some environmental consultants who have offered pro bono support for the application for very low resourced applicants. So you are welcome to contact CClear directly, and we can provide that list.
And I would say if there are any consultants on the line right now who have worked on ECRG projects, perhaps they can share their information with Michael directly.
Yes. Okay, so question from King, will this be a first come, first serve grant or mostly based off of CES score?
It's not first come, first serve. Basically, what will happen is that we start accepting applications on the 14th of August. Application deadline is the 9th of October. We evaluate all of our applications in one, as one pool and compare them against each other, score them against each other, and then all, just based on what the application sort of that applicant cohort looks like, will make decisions. So it's going to be sort of like a competitive decision making process if we are oversubscribed. So first come, first serve grants usually happen when you have like open application periods, which we don't have.
Next question is from Juliana. For site-specific investigation or site-specific cleanup, is the work covered by ECRG a condition to regulatory approval?
I'm trying to understand that question.
Maybe Juliana, if you want to unmute yourself and ask the
That
question.
would be great, thank you.
If she's still
Sure.
on.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Hi, Juliana.
Yeah, the question is about prevailing wage. So I understand that the regulations or the guidelines say that prevailing wage will only need to be paid for the items paid for by ECRG. But we're just trying to make sure, have you seen it bleed over into the payment of the construction contract for the affordable housing projects as well?
Because that's not work that we are connected with, I do not know the answer to that question. We have a very narrow focus, and that's all the information that we get. So if it has bled over, we haven't been told about it, and it's just not part of what we would look at anyway.
Okay. Do you have any other information about this anywhere on your website?
We are going to be coming out with a quick reference guide on the application of prevailing wage, but it's just very broad. It's just very broad because we look to the grantees to work within their own organizations to determine when it's applicable and when it isn't. But we will have that up on our website in a couple of weeks, and that may shed a little bit more light on your question.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking the question.
Great. Okay, next question is from Marina. If the state, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, happens to own a small portion of the site, can we exclude that portion of the site from the application?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great question, and I'm really glad that Marina asked this. Applicants define what their site is. I think it's easy sometimes to get a little bit caught up on, well, my site is this big square, but only half of it meets the eligibility criteria. What should I do? Well, what you do is just define your site as that rectangle and write your application based on that. So however you want to define the site, that's okay with us. We're not defining your site for you. So in this case, obviously a portion owned by CDFW, that's not eligible. So your site, you can define your site as everything that is eligible. And I think that's just a very broad statement that I wanted to make, because we do get asked this question a lot, and it seems to be, it seems to cause some angst. And I just want to be very open and say, you get to define this. I see Greg's hopped on.
Yeah. And there is a little bit of nuance too in our eligibility criteria too for state-owned sites. So a site can be owned by the state and still be eligible as long as it's not controlled by the state. So if you've entered into a long-term lease with a state agency that owns the site, or some other arrangement where the applicant will have control over the site for a long period of time, the site may still be eligible. So it is possible that that part that's owned by a CDFW could potentially be possible. Again, we would recommend that you set up an application assistance call to discuss the specifics of that.
Yep, we definitely need to have a conversation because there's some nuances there. We have to pull our attorneys in on that dialogue. We're open to have that dialogue. And now's a good time before the application comes out.
Great. Another question from Megan: is a phase 1 ESA required if the applicant is not the site owner?
No, it's not required.
Okay. Jack is asking about the Flux application portal. Is there a specific ID number required, and can a consultant submit the application on behalf of a city?
The ID number is something I'm not sure about, and I don't know the answer to that because I think we generate that. You basically have to set up your account on Flux, and you are able to submit on behalf of a city.
Yeah, you can add other team members to the Flux application.
Yeah.
Consultant. Okay, a question from Megan. In the eligibility self-check tool, it looks like the applicant has to be named on a voluntary agreement. In our case, the property owner is the only entity named on the agreement, not the developer/grant applicant. Does this impact our ineligibility to obtain the grant?
Yes, the names have to match up throughout. Our applicant has to be the one on the agreement. The voluntary agreement has to be the one of the grant agreement, and has to be the one who is named on all the invoices. We just want to see our applicant all the way through. So this situation seems ineligible.
Okay, question for Victoria. Our site is publicly owned and is currently monitored by DTSC through a CLRRA CLARA agreement. We received an EPA brownfield grant and expected to completely clean up last year. However, during the cleanup, unforeseen conditions and contaminants were discovered, and the complexity, duration, and cost of cleanup is approximately 10 times larger than expected. We are completing the partial cleanup now and will then pause pending additional funding. Does this seem to be eligible?
This is a very specific circumstance. On the surface, it seems eligible, but I strongly advise you to set up an appointment with CClear and have a discussion with them on the specifics.
Yeah, and if you can do it in the morning, Victoria, we have someone, a great team member who understands all these regulations, that would be best. But of course, you can do it whenever works for you. A question from Beth. Can a project apply more than once to both round 2 and 3? Example, if ownership and site access will be phased and will take place over a few years, but can apply for a first portion under round 2 and then another portion under round 3?
I'm going to say yes with a caveat. Right now, existing grantees are only eligible if they have drawn down 70% of their grant allocation. And so if you apply in one round and you're a grantee, you are not eligible unless you've drawn down your grant significantly.
Next question from Nora. Can one entity apply for more than one separate project?
Yes.
Okay, Jessica. Can funds go towards construction of affordable housing, or is it restricted to cleanup and pre-development for the site?
Not even pre-development. Our funds are just for community-wide assessments, investigation, and cleanup, and nothing outside of that is covered.
Okay, a question from Carrie. Is it still the case that an organization cannot apply under round 2 if they haven't submitted more than a certain percentage of invoices for its round 1 grant? Could an affiliate nonprofit of that entity apply?
It depends on what the affiliate is. It has to be a completely separate organization that has the ability to, manage the grant. So I would say that's a question for us. We should have that conversation and understand the circumstances a little bit better.
Okay. Tanya Ramirez asks, is the census tract data based on median salary or mean salary?
I do not know the answer to that question. Greg's popped in.
I believe it is median. I think there's two types of median income that we are looking at. We are looking at both the county level AMI as well as the census tract median income.
Okay, I have a question from Yamina. If the site is approximately 2 miles stretch of a former railway alignment that is planned to be redeveloped into a walking biking trail connecting communities, and portions of this future trail qualify under CES score, but certain portions don't, how does the overall project get evaluated?
My simple answer to this question is similar to the one that was previously asked about the site that was owned by the state. Apply for only what your site is, apply for only the eligible portions of your site. So bifurcate your site in a way that, meets all the eligibility requirements and just apply for that. We can't consider areas that are not eligible. But I think this is also going to be a longer, deeper conversation. So I think make an appointment with CClear and let's kind of follow up on this discussion, because what is exciting to me is that you're thinking about specific sites, which is great. Let's have that conversation in more detail.
Great. Okay, a question from Ron. The self-check tool says that an existing grantee that has not invoiced at least 70% of the award by mid-September may not be eligible for a round 2 grant. Because it is conditional, can you please clarify the criteria that would be considered under these circumstances?
I think the provision that we've made in our updated version of the guidelines, and we'll be doing the updated version of the self-check tool as well, is that if there's a situation where a grantee has actually conducted the work is conducted and the money has been spent, but the reimbursement process hasn't happened, maybe because of an accounting process or some other complication that we may not know about, that's the specific circumstance that we would consider. So in any case, the money has to have been spent, but maybe there's a government agency that has, a 90-day process for, pushing through the reimbursement requests. So that would be the circumstance where we would consider an exemption. And I think that we said that I think we moved that up a little bit more. It's October now, based on what the current deadline is going to be. So there's a little bit more time to do the work and get the ECRG tasks completed.
Okay, next question is from Michael. We are planning to do a legal lot split since our project is in 2 phases. Phase 1 for non-housing and phase 2 for housing. Does the lot merger need to happen first? Our cleanup need based on investigations is on the future housing portion.
Once again, it's how you define the site to us. So if you can find a way to define the site, as a single APN, for example, or if you want to just get a survey done and give us the ways and means so we can see what portion is included, that's all we need to do. So, some of these more complicated, like land use things, these are things that we are not experts on. We just want you to tell us what your site is.
Yeah, and you can always set up a follow-up call, Michael. I believe we did TA. Thank you for this webinar. Okay, I have a question from Ted. How is cleanup costs predetermined when costs are likely unknown until cleanup starts?
This is why we've changed the entry point of the cleanup grant to having an approved cleanup plan, or at least a cleanup plan that's under review by a regulatory agency, because at that point you have, a pretty good idea and you have estimates in place. So that's why at that point it's not unknown. If it truly is unknown, that means you've got more planning to do, and then that's when you apply for an investigation grant.
Great, thanks for clarifying. I have another question from an existing grantee. Ron, did I understand that October will be the new deadline for 70% invoicing on an existing grant for round 2 eligibility?
I believe so. I don't have the guidelines in front of me, and I can't remember exactly what we said, but generally, yes, it's around the time that we have the deadline for the applications to be submitted for round 2.
Right, and people should contact their project managers with any questions, of course.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, so I will double check, but I don't see any questions, any hands raised. So if anyone has any other burning questions, please let us know now. We are done with the Q&A in the chat, and also, you can always schedule one-on-one application assistance. I see. Okay, yeah, and definitely just reach out to us if you have any other questions. Miriam, I think we're done with Q&A if you want to close it out.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Natalie, for your help today. Thanks to Greg for jumping in. And most of all, thank you to all of you who participated and asked all your great questions. I hope to see you all next week, and before then, maybe even at some of our application assistance calls. Thank you, everyone.